Some debts can't be measured in money. David Denaro learned this truth in the most unlikely place. Aisle 7 of a Brooklyn supermarket, holding a $1 bill offered by a child who had every reason to keep it. The day had started like any other power breakfast with senators, 8-figure wire transfers, decisions that moved markets. Then his card declined. A simple technical glitch. Embarrassing, certainly. Fixable with a phone call. But time stopped when small fingers pushed a crumpled dollar into his palm. "Mister, is $1 enough?" David looked down at the girl. 7 years old, maybe 8, balancing on crutches that seemed too heavy for her frame. Her dark brown curly hair framed a face with warm brown skin and eyes that carried both hope and caution. Her jacket was threadbare, her shoes held together with duct tape. The dollar she offered him might have been her last. The cashier waited. The line behind him grew restless. His security detail reached for their wallets. But David Denaro, international crime lord, billionaire, untouchable, stood paralyzed by a child's generosity. In a world where everything had a price, where loyalty was bought and betrayal was currency, this moment felt sacred, dangerous. He accepted the dollar. He didn't know that simple transaction would cost him everything. And save him. The dollar felt heavier than it should. Paper and ink weighing no more than a gram. Yet David's hand trembled slightly as his fingers closed around it, a tremor no one else would notice, but one he felt in his bones. Around him, Giuseppe's Market continued its Tuesday afternoon rhythm. Shopping carts squeaking, price scanners beeping, the deli counter calling out numbers in Italian-accented English. Normal life, unfolding as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. "Thank you," David heard himself say, the words emerging rough and unpracticed. Gratitude wasn't a language he spoke fluently. In his world, you didn't thank people, you paid them, rewarded them, or eliminated them. Appreciation was weakness, sentiment was liability. But this child, with her worn crutches and too large jacket, had just performed an act so pure it felt like a violation of every principle he'd built his empire upon. The girl's face transformed with a smile that seemed to contain more light than the fluorescent fixtures overhead. "You're welcome, mister. Mama says when we have even a little, we should share with people who need it more." She shifted her weight, adjusting the crutches with the unconscious efficiency of long practice. "She says that's what makes us rich, even when we're not." The philosophy struck David like a physical blow. Here was a child living in poverty, offering charity to a billionaire, and calling herself rich. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so devastating. "Your mama sounds very wise," David managed, his voice softer than he'd intended. He noticed details now, the way her curls bounced when she moved, the determination in her brown eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of himself at that age. "She is." Jana's enthusiasm was infectious, her eyes brightening. "She knows everything. Well, almost everything. She doesn't know how to fix my leg. But the doctors say that's okay because maybe someday—" She stopped abruptly, as if catching herself sharing too much with a stranger. I should go. Mama will worry if I'm late." She turned with careful precision, navigating her crutches through the narrow checkout lane. David watched her progress toward the automatic doors, the slight drag of her left leg, the way she favored her right side, the determined set of her small shoulders. Even her exit was an act of courage. The glass doors slid open, and she disappeared into the overcast March afternoon. Only then did David become aware of his surroundings again. The cashier, a middle-aged woman named Rosa, who'd worked this register for 15 years, stared at him with something between terror and confusion. The man behind him in line had taken 3 steps back, his cart serving as a barrier. Everyone recognized him. Everyone always did. But no one had ever seen David Denaro accept charity before. "Sir?" Rosa's voice cracked slightly. Your groceries are ready. Should I?" Leo Martinez materialized at David's right shoulder, his presence as sudden and silent as always. His security chief moved like smoke there one moment, gone the next, reappearing exactly where he was needed. Dark-skinned and sharp-eyed, Leo had spent 8 years reading David's micro-expressions better than most men could read full sentences. Without a word, Leo extended a platinum card toward Rosa, his eyes already scanning the store for threats that didn't exist. David held up one finger. "Wait." Leo froze mid-motion, his training overriding his confusion, and what he saw now in his boss's face made him pocket the card immediately. "Rosa." David's voice returned to its natural register, calm, controlled, carrying the weight of absolute authority. His tattoos shifted slightly as he gestured, the roses and intricate designs on his forearms visible beneath the black t-shirt he wore. He dressed casually today, the silver medallion at his neck catching the light, a rare day without the armor of expensive suits. Complete the transaction. Keep the dollar as your tip. Sir, I can't. That little girl she gave you. I know what she gave me. David's jaw tightened imperceptibly, his beard emphasizing the sharp angles of his face. Which is why I'm going to give her something in return. But first, I need to know exactly what she needs. He turned to Leo, his movements precise and deliberate as he slid the crumpled dollar bill into his pocket. The gesture was significant. David Denaro kept nothing without purpose. Every item in his possession served a function. This dollar had just become something more valuable than currency. It had become a contract. Leo, follow her. The command was issued in the same tone David used for ordering executions. Discreetly, I want a full profile delivered to my office by 8 o'clock tonight. Everything. Where she lives, who's in her family, her medical history, her school records, financial situation, social connections. He paused, his dark eyes hardening. And I mean everything. If she has a library card, I want to know what books she checks out. If her mother has parking tickets, I want the dates and locations. If there's a father in the picture, I want his blood type and criminal record. Leo's expression didn't change, but David caught the slight widening of his eyes, surprise quickly suppressed. Boss, she's just a kid with a dollar. This seems... I don't accept charity, Leo. You know this. David's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that made Rosa take an involuntary step backward. That child just gave me something, which means I owe her something, and I always pay my debts. The question is, what does she actually need? Understanding dawned in Leo's eyes. You think she was asking for help? I know she was asking for help. David's hand touched his pocket where the dollar rested. No child gives away money they clearly need unless they're desperate for something money can't immediately buy. She was testing me, seeing if I was worth the investment of her last dollar. And if you're right, then she just hired the most expensive problem solver in New York for $1. A ghost of a smile touched David's lips, cold, predatory, but carrying a strange undercurrent of respect. Best bargain she'll ever get. Leo nodded once and disappeared into the afternoon crowd outside, his leather jacket blending seamlessly with the foot traffic on the Brooklyn street. David watched him go, then turned his attention to the forgotten groceries. Rosa had already bagged everything, her hands shaking slightly as she handled the items. She understood, as everyone in this neighborhood understood, that David Denaro's attention was both blessing and curse. You wanted his protection. You never wanted his focus. She had no way of knowing that a 7-year-old girl with curly hair and crutches had just accomplished what federal prosecutors, rival crime families, and international law enforcement agencies had failed to do for 3 decades. She'd gotten David Denaro to care about something other than power. Rosa. David's voice gentled fractionally as he accepted the bags. That girl comes through your line again. You call me. Immediately. Here's my direct number. He produced a business card from his wallet, plain white, no company name, just 10 digits embossed in black. Don't use it for anything else, just her. Rosa took the card with trembling fingers, nodding mutely. David turned toward the exit, his 6-foot frame cutting through the narrow aisle with unconscious authority. People parted without realizing they were moving. It was always this way. His presence rearranged spaces, bent social dynamics, commanded deference without demanding it. But as he stepped into the gray afternoon, carrying groceries like any ordinary man, David Denaro felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years. He felt owned. A child had purchased his loyalty for $1, and the price he was about to pay in return would bankrupt him in ways that had nothing to do with money. The contract had been signed. Now came the investigation. Leo Martinez returned at exactly 7:47 p.m., 13 minutes ahead of schedule, which told David everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. When Leo was early, the news was bad. When Leo was early and carrying a file that thick, the news was catastrophic. David stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching Manhattan transform into its evening persona, a glittering promise of power and possibility that suddenly felt obscene. He'd changed into his usual evening attire, though the casual black remained, his hair still pulled back in its low knot. He didn't turn around when he heard the door close. "Tell me I'm wrong," David said quietly. Tell me that little girl is just precocious and generous, living a normal middle-class life with 2 parents and a college fund. Boss. Tell me, Leo. The silence that followed was answer enough. David turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral, and gestured toward the leather chairs positioned before his desk. Leo sat, but his posture remained rigid, a soldier delivering casualty reports. Gina Brooks, age 7, Leo began, opening the file with reluctant precision. Lives in subsidized housing, building 247 on Flatbush Avenue, apartment 3C. Mother is Charlotte Brooks, age 34, single parent. No father listed on the birth certificate. No child support. No family support system visible in any records. Medical? Leo's jaw tightened. Jaina has congenital hip dysplasia. Left side, severe. She's been on the waiting list for corrective surgery for 2 years. Without it, she'll likely lose mobility entirely by her teenage years. Current prognosis is wheelchair dependent by age 16. David's hands gripped the armrest, his knuckles whitening beneath the tattoos that marked his skin. Cost? $73,000, not covered by their current insurance. Charlotte's been saving she's got about $4,000 in a medical fund. At her current rate, she'll have enough money in approximately never. Buy the surgery. Tonight. Anonymous donor. Make it happen. Already anticipated that order, boss. Contacted Mount Sinai's orthopedic department. Surgery can be scheduled within 2 weeks. Leo paused, his expression darkening. But that's not the real problem. David felt something cold settle in his chest. Continue. Charlotte Brooks was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 18 months ago. Aggressive variant. Progressive. She's already lost significant function tremors, fatigue, partial vision impairment in her left eye. Leo consulted the medical report with the detachment of a man reading stock prices. Her neurologist gives her 3 years, maybe 5 with aggressive treatment that she can't afford and is refusing anyway. Refusing? The word came out sharp as broken glass. She won't accept charity. Works 2 jobs, laundromat morning shift, office cleaning at night. Refuses assistance from social services beyond the housing subsidy. Her caseworker notes she's pathologically independent and resistant to intervention. Leo looked up from the file. Sound familiar? David ignored the comparison. So she's dying, her daughter is going to be crippled, and she's too proud to accept help. Fantastic. Just fantastic. He stood abruptly, pacing toward the windows, his reflection showing a man whose casual appearance belied the danger coiled within. What about the father? Family? Anyone? Ghost. Charlotte has no living parents, no siblings. Jaina's father is listed as unknown on all documents. No friends close enough to be listed as emergency contacts. They're completely isolated. Leo closed the file with audible finality. Boss, that kid didn't give you $1 out of generosity. She gave you $1 because she's watched her mother refuse help so many times. She thought maybe, just maybe, if she paid someone, her mother couldn't say no. The observation hit David like a physical blow. A 7-year-old child had understood transactional psychology better than most of his associates. She'd identified her mother's weakness, pride, and attempted to engineer a solution using the only currency she possessed. She was, David realized with grim admiration, exactly like him. No, David said finally, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who'd built an empire on refusing to accept limitations. No, this doesn't end with that woman dying and that child in a wheelchair. I don't care what it costs. Boss, MS isn't something you can throw money at. There's no cure. Then we buy time. David spun around, his dark eyes blazing with the same intensity that had made senators nervous and federal prosecutors retire early. We get her the best neurologist in the world. Experimental treatments, clinical trials, whatever extends her life. And while we're doing that, we fix everything else. The apartment who owns that building. Leo consulted his notes. Slumlord named Sergio Kovic. 6-building portfolio, all subsidized housing. Multiple violations, numerous complaints. He's squeezing maximum rent for minimum maintenance. Buy the building. Today. Install proper management. Make it safe, accessible, clean. David's mind raced through calculations, strategies, contingencies, and fix their apartment, specifically wheelchair accessible, for when Charlotte needs it, proper lighting, air quality. I want it done within a week. David. Leo rarely used his boss's first name, which made David pause mid-thought. You realize what you're doing here? You're not solving a problem. You're trying to control death itself. And you can't. Nobody can. The truth of it settled over the room like ash. David Denaro, who controlled shipping routes and politicians, who could make problems disappear with a phone call, who'd built an empire on the fundamental principle that everything had a price, was facing an enemy that didn't negotiate. Nature, fate, mortality. The rage that followed was cold and calculating rather than hot and explosive. This was David at his most dangerous, not when he shouted, but when he went silent and started planning. "You're right," David said quietly. "I can't cure her. I can't stop what's coming." He pulled the crumpled dollar from his pocket, smoothing it carefully on his desk. "But I can make sure that when Charlotte Brooks dies, she dies knowing her daughter is safe, healthy, protected, that she won't leave Jenna alone in the world with nothing. And when Charlotte figures out who's behind all these miracles," David's smile was sharp enough to cut, "then she'll understand that her daughter is a much better negotiator than she is." Jaina invested $1 and bought her mother time, safety, and peace of mind. He slid the dollar into a clear acrylic case he pulled from his desk drawer. Best return on investment in the history of capitalism. Leo stood, recognizing a dismissal when he heard one. "I'll start making calls." "Leo." David's voice stopped him at the door. "Everything runs through offshore accounts. Nothing traces back to me. Charlotte can't refuse help she doesn't know is coming from me." "Understood. Anything else?" David looked down at the encased dollar bill on his desk, a receipt for a debt he was only beginning to understand. "Yes. Schedule weekly reports. I want to know everything. Her treatments, Jaina's recovery, their needs." He paused. "I want to know when Charlotte's condition changes. The moment it changes." Because David Denaro was still fighting a battle he knew he'd lose, armed with the only weapons he possessed: money, power, and the stubborn refusal to accept that some contracts couldn't be fulfilled. The war against death had begun, and David had never learned how to surrender. Sergio Kovic made 3 critical mistakes in his 47 years of mediocre existence. The first was buying subsidized housing and treating it like a personal ATM. The second was ignoring the 14 violation notices from the city while pocketing maintenance funds. The third, and most catastrophic, was charging Charlotte Brooks an extra $200 last month because her daughter's crutches damaged the hallway walls. He made that third mistake exactly 9 days before David Denaro learned his name. The acquisition of Building 247 on Flatbush Avenue took precisely 4 hours and cost David $2.3 million, about $500,000 more than the property was worth. But the previous owner had been remarkably motivated to sell after receiving photographs of his weekend activities in Atlantic City. David didn't particularly care about the man's gambling habits or his creative interpretation of wedding vows, but leverage was leverage, and time was a luxury he couldn't afford. Sergio received the news of new ownership via a hand-delivered letter at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday, accompanied by 2 gentlemen whose presence suggested they didn't accept counteroffers. Leo, dressed in his usual sharp attire, maintained the polite demeanor that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "Mr. Kovic," Leo said with careful politeness, "your services are no longer required. You have 4 hours to vacate the premises and transfer all relevant documents, keys, and records." Sergio, who dealt with enough city bureaucrats to recognize when he was outmatched, nevertheless tried to bluster. "You can't just— I have rights. I have a contract. I'll sue for—" "You'll accept the generous severance package," Leo interrupted, sliding an envelope across Sergio's cluttered desk, "which includes 6 months' salary, relocation assistance, and our sincere recommendation that you pursue opportunities elsewhere. We've identified a promising property management position in Anchorage, Alaska. Fresh start, clean slate, tremendous opportunity for someone with your particular talents." "Alaska?" Sergio's voice climbed an octave. "I'm not moving to—" The second gentleman, Frank, though Sergio would never learn his name, stepped forward slightly, just slightly, enough to remind Sergio that some conversations had foregone conclusions. "Of course," Sergio amended quickly, his survival instincts finally overriding his greed. "Alaska does sound promising. Very promising. When would you need me to—" "Today," Leo said simply. "There's a flight at 2 p.m., first class. We've already packed your apartment. The movers are waiting downstairs." Sergio left for Anchorage 7 hours later with a cashier's check, 3 suitcases, and the distinct impression that refusing would have resulted in a far less comfortable relocation. He wasn't wrong. David had prepared contingency plans ranging from generous severance to extended involuntary vacation at an undisclosed location, and was privately pleased they'd only needed option one. Violence, David had learned long ago, was expensive and inefficient. Fear was renewable and cost-effective. By Friday, Building 247 had a new manager, Mrs. Patricia Chen, a 62-year-old former school principal, whose references were impeccable and whose salary was quietly triple the market rate. Her first action was hiring a proper maintenance crew. Her second was installing security cameras in the hallways. Her third was personally knocking on the door of apartment 3C with a smile that could melt ice and a clipboard full of renovation requests. Charlotte Brooks answered the door with Jenna balanced on one hip, the girl's crutches propped against the wall behind them, and the immediate wariness of someone accustomed to bad news arriving without warning. Charlotte's light brown skin showed the exhaustion of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts, while Jana's curly dark hair bounced as she shifted in her mother's arms. "Miss Brooks, I'm Patricia Chen, the new building manager. I'm conducting wellness checks on all units and wanted to discuss some overdue maintenance issues." Patricia's voice carried the brisk efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years managing teenagers and wasn't about to be intimidated by suspicious tenants. "May I come in?" Charlotte's apartment told its own story. Spotlessly clean despite the peeling paint, furniture arranged to maximize Gina's mobility, medical bills stacked in careful piles on a desk that doubled as a dining table. Patricia noted everything with the practiced eye of someone trained to look beyond surfaces. "The previous management," Patricia continued, consulting her clipboard with theatrical disapproval, "neglected approximately 47 maintenance requests for this unit alone. Unacceptable. We'll be addressing the water damage in your bathroom, replacing the kitchen fixtures, installing proper heating, and," she glanced at Gina's crutches, "adding accessibility features throughout. Grab bars, wider doorways, non-slip flooring, standard upgrades for all units." Charlotte's expression shifted from wariness to confusion to suspicion, in rapid succession. I can't afford." "No additional cost to tenants," Patricia interrupted smoothly. "New ownership is committed to bringing all properties up to code. Frankly, it's embarrassing. This wasn't done years ago. We'll start next week if that works with your schedule." What Charlotte didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her unit was the only one receiving the full luxury renovation. The other apartments were getting basic repairs and fresh paint. Apartment 3C was being transformed into something resembling a private medical facility disguised as subsidized housing. Jana, demonstrating the supernatural perception of children everywhere, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, does this mean we get a bathtub that doesn't make scary sounds?" Patricia laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Absolutely. Top of the line. Quiet as a mouse, and deep enough for proper bubble baths." Charlotte still looked uncertain, but Jana's delighted expression, her brown eyes lighting up with hope, made refusal impossible. "That's very kind. Thank you." 2 weeks later, Gina Brooks was wheeled into Mount Sinai's orthopedic wing for her corrective surgery, paid for by an anonymous charitable foundation that Charlotte's caseworker assured her was completely legitimate and handled dozens of pediatric cases annually. The foundation existed. Technically, David had established it that morning with a $50 million endowment and very specific instructions about its first beneficiary. The surgery took 6 hours. Dr. Rebecca Singh, one of the country's top pediatric orthopedic surgeons who'd been coincidentally lecturing in New York that week, led the procedure with the precision of someone who understood that failure wasn't an option. Not because of professional pride, though she had plenty, but because the anonymous donor who'd funded her entire research department for the next 5 years had made exactly one request: make sure Gina Brooks walks without pain. David received Leo's text at 9:47 p.m. "Surgery successful. Full recovery expected. She'll walk." He read it 3 times, standing alone in his office with the city glittering below him like scattered diamonds. His reflection in the window showed a man whose casual black clothing and pulled-back hair gave him the appearance of someone far less dangerous than he actually was. The tattoos on his forearms seemed to shift in the low light as he reached for the scotch he'd poured. Then he carefully filed the message, left the drink untouched, and stared at the encased dollar bill on his desk. One problem solved, the impossible one still waiting. Charlotte Brooks was dying, and all his money couldn't rewrite that ending. But he'd bought Gina time, safety, and a future without crutches. The contract was being fulfilled, one impossibility at a time. The reports arrived every Monday at precisely 8 a.m., and David Denaro had come to dread them with an intensity usually reserved for federal indictments. Week 1. Charlotte's tremors worsening in her right hand. Dropped a coffee cup. Gina helped clean it up. Made jokes about Butterfingers. Patient maintains positive attitude despite obvious progression. Week 4. Significant fatigue. Charlotte, reduced to one job, had to quit the night cleaning shift. Gina started helping with laundry, cooking simple meals. Patient refusing additional pain medication. States she wants to stay present for her daughter. Week 9. Vision impairment increasing in left eye. Nearly fell on stairs. Building manager installed additional railings as part of standard upgrades. Patient accepted modifications without comment. David read each report in his office at dawn, before the city woke up and demanded his attention for matters that suddenly felt obscenely trivial. Shipping disputes, territory negotiations, politicians requiring careful management. All of it background noise to the slow-motion tragedy unfolding in a renovated apartment in Brooklyn. He'd sit at his desk in his usual black attire, hair pulled back, the silver medallion at his neck catching the early morning light filtering through the windows. The tattoos on his forearms seemed darker somehow as he gripped each report, as if the ink absorbed his growing frustration. He'd assembled what Leo privately called the Invisible Care Team, a network of specialists who never mentioned their patron's name. Dr. Helena Marquez, a neurologist from Johns Hopkins, began consulting on Charlotte's case via telehealth, offering treatment recommendations that Charlotte's regular physician would mysteriously implement. Physical therapists appeared through a community outreach program. Medical equipment materialized as loaner items, from hospitals clearing inventory. Charlotte accepted it all with the gracious confusion of someone who'd stopped questioning good fortune and started simply being grateful for it. But she wasn't stupid. Week 12 brought the conversation David had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. Leo delivered the news with his usual efficiency. Charlotte asked her caseworker point-blank who was paying for everything. The caseworker stuck to the script: charitable foundations, grants, community programs. Charlotte smiled, nodded, and said, "Please tell whoever it is that I'm grateful." "She knows," David said flatly. "She suspects," Leo corrected. "But she's not asking questions. My read? She's decided ignorance is strategic. Can't refuse help she can't prove exists." David almost smiled. Charlotte Brooks was proving to be as stubborn and pragmatic as he was. Under different circumstances, he would have respected the hell out of her. Under these circumstances, he just wanted her to live. Week 16. Charlotte experienced her first significant fall. Jana found her mother on the bathroom floor at 6 a.m., unconscious. The girl 10 months post-surgery and walking with only a slight limp now. Her curly dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, as she'd called 911, demonstrated a composure that broke David's heart when he read Leo's report. Paramedics arrived in 4 minutes. Charlotte was hospitalized for observation, released after 2 days. Jenna stayed with a neighbor, missed no school, told teachers her mom had a little accident but she's fine now. That was when David knew they were running out of time. He authorized the final phase of infrastructure, a hospital-grade bed installed in Charlotte's apartment, disguised as an ergonomic sleep system, covered by her insurance. A home health aide named Maria began visiting 3 times weekly through a pilot program for MS patients. An emergency alert system appeared, supposedly standard issue for all ground floor units now. Charlotte accepted everything with quiet dignity and knowing eyes. Week 22. Charlotte's mobility severely compromised. Using wheelchair full-time. Jenna has adapted beautifully. Patient reports daughter is fiercely independent and capable beyond her years. Charlotte told her caseworker, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving her alone." David read that line 17 times, standing at his window watching snow fall over Manhattan. His reflection showed a man whose appearance, casual, tattooed, dangerous, belied the vulnerability he felt in that moment. Then he made a decision he'd been avoiding for months. "Leo, I need to know the moment, the exact moment Charlotte's condition becomes terminal. Not months, days. I need to know when we're at the end. Boss. I need to prepare." David's voice carried a weight Leo had never heard before. For what comes after? Week 29 brought what they'd all been dreading. Aggressive progression. Charlotte's speech slurring. Cognitive function declining. Dr. Marquez's assessment was clinical and devastating. Weeks, possibly days. Charlotte knew it too. On a Thursday evening in late November, while Jana slept peacefully in her bedroom, her walls covered with drawings, her desk cluttered with homework, her curly hair spread across her pillow, her life blissfully normal. Charlotte sat in her wheelchair beside her daughter's bed and spoke in a whisper that the security system David had installed captured with crystal clarity. "My beautiful girl," Charlotte said, her words slightly slurred but understandable. "You saved us. You know. That dollar you gave that man, I know you thought I didn't know about it, but I knew. I always know." She reached out with a trembling hand, smoothing Gina's dark curls. "You were so brave. So smart. And whoever he is, whatever he is, he kept his promise. He gave us time, good time. Time where you got to be a little girl who runs and plays and doesn't worry about money or medicine or losing me." Tears tracked down Charlotte's face, silent and steady. "I need you to know something, baby. When I'm gone, and I will be gone soon, you won't be alone. I don't know how I know this, but I do. That man, the one you gave the dollar to, he's been watching over us, protecting us, and he'll protect you after." Charlotte's voice broke. "I don't know why. I don't know what you said to him, or what he saw in you, but he's keeping a promise. So when the time comes, don't be afraid. Don't refuse help because you think it makes you weak. Your mama learned that lesson too late. Don't make my mistakes." She leaned forward, kissing Gina's forehead with infinite tenderness. "You were the best thing I ever did, the only thing I did right. And I'm not sorry about anything, not the struggle, not the pain, not any of it, because it gave me you." Charlotte stayed there until her trembling became too severe, then wheeled herself silently back to her own room, leaving Gina sleeping peacefully, unaware that her mother had just said goodbye. In his office, David Denaro listened to the recording 3 times, his tattooed hands gripping the desk edge, his jaw tight beneath his beard. Then he deleted it. Some moments were too sacred even for his files. He picked up his phone. "Leo, it's time. Activate the final contingency plan. And call my lawyer. I need to have some documents prepared." The contract was entering its final phase, and David was about to pay a price he'd never anticipated. Everything. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and David knew before he answered what Leo was going to say. Some truths announce themselves in silence before words give them shape. "She's gone, boss," peacefully. "In her sleep. The home health aide found her 20 minutes ago." David was already moving, pulling on clothes in the dark black jeans, black t-shirt, the silver medallion settling against his chest. His hands were steady despite the cold weight settling in his chest. Gina? Still asleep. Maria didn't wake her. Wasn't sure what the protocol was for. Leo's voice faltered. The first time in 8 years David had heard him lose composure. "For telling a kid her mother's dead. I'm 10 minutes out. Don't let anyone wake her. And Leo? Clear the building. I don't want strangers around when she realizes." David made the drive from Manhattan to Brooklyn in 7 minutes, traffic laws becoming optional suggestions for a man racing toward a promise he'd made without words. His security detail followed at a discreet distance, silent shadows protecting a mission they didn't fully understand but executed with absolute precision. The apartment building looked obscenely normal in the pre-dawn darkness, streetlights casting their usual glow, a few early risers heading to work. The world continuing its rotation, as if everything hadn't just fundamentally changed. David took the stairs 2 at a time, his tattooed arms flexing with each movement, reaching the 3rd floor just as Maria emerged from apartment 3C with tears streaming down her face. She started to speak, but David held up one hand. She nodded, understanding, and moved aside. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. That terrible silence that follows departure, when a space realizes it's lost its purpose. Charlotte's hospital bed sat empty in the living room, sheets already changed by Maria's efficient hands. Medical equipment blinked peacefully, still monitoring a patient who no longer needed monitoring. David moved past it all toward Jana's bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. She was still sleeping, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek, her dark curly hair spread across a pillow covered in cartoon stars. 8 years old now. She'd grown taller in the months he'd been watching over her. Her legs had straightened beautifully after the surgery. No trace remaining of the girl who'd struggled with crutches. Her brown skin looked peaceful in the dim light filtering through the curtains. She looked innocent, completely unaware that she'd just become an orphan. David stood in the doorway for a long moment. This man who'd ordered executions without hesitation, who'd built an empire on calculated violence, who'd never once allowed sentiment to compromise strategy. He stood there and felt something inside him crack with audible finality. Leo appeared at his shoulder, silent as always. Boss. Social services will need to be notified. They'll send someone to collect her, place her in emergency foster care while they process. No. The word came out flat and absolute. David. Leo's use of his first name was a warning. She has no family, no legal guardian. The state has protocols for. I said no. David turned, his dark eyes carrying an intensity that made even Leo take a half step back. Call Marcus. Tell him I need emergency custody paperwork filed today. Temporary guardianship pending full adoption. I don't care what it costs or who needs to be persuaded. That child doesn't go into the system. You're talking about adopting her. Leo's voice carried disbelief rather than judgment. You, David Denaro, international crime lord, are planning to adopt an 8-year-old girl. I'm planning to keep a promise. David's jaw tightened beneath his beard, his tattoos shifting as his hands clenched. Charlotte knew. She knew someone was helping them, and she trusted me to protect Gina after she was gone. I'm not putting that kid in foster care to be processed like paperwork. Boss, think about what you're saying. Your life, your business, you can't just… Can't what? David's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Can't be responsible for a child? Can't provide a stable home? Can't ensure she's safe, educated, cared for? He turned back to Jaina's sleeping form. You're right. I can't. Not as I am now. The implication hung between them like smoke. You're not suggesting… I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. David's hands clenched at his sides. David Denaro, crime lord, cannot be Jaina Brooks' father. He travels constantly. He has enemies. He makes decisions that put everyone around him at risk. He's exactly the wrong person to raise a child. Then what? Then David Denaro needs to stop existing. The words came out calm, measured, final. I liquidate everything, dismantle the organization. Take a new name, new life, new location, completely clean break. Leo stared at him like he'd announced plans to fly to the moon. You're talking about walking away from a billion-dollar empire, from 30 years of building power, from everything you are. No. David's voice softened as he looked at Jaina, her curly hair framing her peaceful face. I'm talking about becoming something different, something better. Charlotte spent her last breath trusting me to protect her daughter. I accepted $1 8 months ago, and that contract just came due in full. Behind them, Jaina stirred, making a small sound in her sleep. Both men froze. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused in the way of children waking in darkness. Then awareness crept in the strange hour, the unfamiliar presence in her doorway, the terrible absence she couldn't yet name but could feel in her bones. Mama? Her voice was small, hopeful, breaking. David moved before conscious thought, crossing the room and kneeling beside her bed. Jaina, I'm the man from the grocery store. Do you remember? She blinked at him, processing, her brown eyes widening as recognition dawned. The man with the card. I gave you my $1. You did, and I owe you something for that. David's throat tightened. Your mama, she got very sick, sweetheart. And tonight while you were sleeping, He didn't need to finish. Gina's face crumpled with a comprehension that no 8-year-old should possess. The sob that tore from her was primal, devastating, the sound of a heart breaking in real time. David did the only thing he could. He gathered her into his arms, this small, shaking girl with curly dark hair and tear-streaked brown skin, who'd paid him $1 and was now costing him everything, and held her while she shattered. Over her head, he met Leo's eyes. The contract was complete. David Denaro had just bought a daughter for $1. Now came the hard part, learning how to be her father. Jaina fell asleep at 6:23 a.m., exhausted from grief, curled against David's chest with her small fists clutching his black t-shirt like a lifeline. He held her for another hour, watching dawn break over Brooklyn through her bedroom window, before carefully transferring her to Maria's care with instructions that were more plea than command. Don't let her wake up alone. By 8:45 a.m., David was back in his Manhattan penthouse, standing at the windows that had witnessed 1,000 calculated decisions, preparing to make the one choice that defied all calculation. The city stretched before him, his city, in all the ways that mattered. 3 decades of careful construction had given him invisible ownership of shipping routes, political favors, real estate portfolios, and the kind of power that made mayors return calls within minutes. He'd built an empire on the fundamental principle that control was survival, that sentiment was liability, that emotions were weaknesses to exploit in others but never indulge in yourself. Then a 7-year-old girl with curly hair and crutches had offered him $1, and the entire architecture of his life had begun its slow, inevitable collapse. David pulled the encased dollar bill from his desk drawer, holding it up to the morning light. $1. The worst investment he'd ever accepted, the best contract he'd ever signed. You could put her in a good boarding school. Leo's voice came from the doorway, quiet and careful. Top-tier education, full security, visit on holidays. Keep your empire, keep her safe. Win-win. Boarding school. David didn't turn around. So she loses her mother and gains an emotionally unavailable criminal who ships her off to strangers. That your idea of keeping a promise? It's practical. She gets stability, education, protection. She gets abandonment. David's grip tightened on the case. Again, Charlotte trusted me to protect her daughter, not warehouse her in some institution, while I continue playing emperor. Then what's the alternative? Leo moved into the room, his frustration finally breaking through his usual composure. You going to show up to parent-teacher conferences between arms deals? Coach her soccer team while running territorial negotiations? Read bedtime stories after ordering hits? No. David turned slowly, his dark eyes carrying a certainty that made Leo's breath catch. I'm not going to do any of those things, because David DeNaro isn't going to exist anymore. The silence that followed felt apocalyptic. Boss. Don't call me that. David's voice was quiet, final. That title has an expiration date of approximately 48 hours. After that, I'm just a man who adopted a kid and wants to give her a normal life. Leo stared at him like he'd started speaking ancient Greek. You're serious. You're actually going to walk away. I don't have a choice. David set the dollar case down with deliberate care. My empire has enemies. Enemies who would leverage an 8-year-old girl without hesitation if they knew she mattered to me. Rivals who'd see her as weakness to exploit. Federal prosecutors who'd use her as leverage. He gestured at the glittering city below. All of this? It's a target painted on her back. We can protect her. Increase security, safe houses, private schools with Leo. David's tone carried the weight of finality. What kind of childhood is that? Armed guards at her birthday parties? Bulletproof cars for school drop-off? Learning to check under vehicles for bombs before she's old enough to drive? He shook his head. Charlotte died trusting me to give Jaina a life, not a gilded prison. So you're just going to throw away 30 years of work? Billions in assets? Power that makes senators nervous? Leo's voice climbed with disbelief. For a kid you met 9 months ago? For a kid who trusted me when she had no reason to? Who gave me her last dollar when I was a stranger? David's jaw tightened beneath his beard. For a kid who's sleeping in the next room at her neighbor's apartment, who just lost everything, and who's about to find out if the scary man from the grocery store is worth the investment she made. Leo ran a hand over his face, processing. You realize how insane this sounds? You're one of the most powerful men in New York. You don't just stop. People retire all the time. Crime lords don't retire, David. They get arrested, killed, or betrayed. They don't file paperwork and move to the suburbs. Then I'll be the first. David reached for his phone with the decisiveness of a man who'd stopped debating and started executing. Call Frank and Ben. Office meeting in 1 hour. And Leo? This stays between the 3 of you until I decide how to roll it out. What are you going to tell them? The truth. David's smile was sharp and sad simultaneously. That I just got a better offer. 53 minutes later, David stood before the 3 men who'd built his empire alongside him. Frank Torres, his financial architect, the man who'd laundered billions so cleanly even forensic accountants applauded his artistry. Ben Kim, his strategic advisor, whose understanding of territorial politics bordered on clairvoyant. And Leo, his security chief, protector, and the closest thing David had to family. 3 men who'd followed him for decades, who'd never questioned an order, who'd built something extraordinary from nothing. 3 men about to learn their empire had an expiration date. Gentlemen, David remained standing, his tattooed arms crossed, his casual black attire somehow making him appear more dangerous rather than less. I'm going to say something that sounds insane, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Frank leaned back, his accountant's brain already calculating scenarios. This is about the girl. Everything's about the girl now. David picked up the encased dollar bill, holding it so the morning light made it glow. 9 months ago, a kid gave me this, $1. And in return, I'm giving her everything. David, Ben started. I said, let me finish. David's voice carried command despite his casual stance. I'm liquidating. Complete organizational dismantlement. Every asset sold or transferred. Every operation shut down or delegated to regional operators who'll think they're getting promoted rather than abandoned. Full dissolution of the Denaro empire within 90 days. The shock was absolute. Frank's pen stopped mid-calculation. Ben's strategic mind visibly rebooted. Leo, who'd known this was coming, still looked like he'd been punched. You're walking away, Frank said finally, from billions. I'm walking toward something more valuable. David's grip tightened on the dollar case. A promise I made to a dying woman. A debt I owe to a kid who trusted me when she shouldn't have. A chance to be something other than what I've been for 30 years. You're talking about fatherhood, Ben said slowly, his strategic mind working through implications. Adopting her, raising her, being normal. I'm talking about keeping a contract. David set the dollar down with finality. Charlotte Brooks died believing I'd protect her daughter, that I'd give Gina a life worth living. And I can't do that as David Denaro, crime lord. So David Denaro needs to die. Metaphorically, Leo added quickly, glancing at Frank and Ben's alarmed expressions. He means metaphorically. Obviously. David's tone suggested nothing was obvious. I need complete liquidation protocols. Frank, I want every asset converted to clean money and placed in untraceable trust funds. Ben, I need dissolution strategies that look like natural evolution rather than abandonment. Leo, I need new identities, plural, and relocation plans that put us somewhere nobody's looking. Us? Leo's voice carried surprise. You think I'm doing this alone? David's smile was genuine for the first time that morning. I don't know how to be a father, Leo. I'm going to need help. You're coming with us. Consultant salary, legitimate cover story, the works. Boss, That's the other thing. Stop calling me boss. In 90 days, I'm just David. And this? He gestured at the office, the view, the empire. This is history. Frank cleared his throat. And if we think this is a catastrophic mistake, then you're probably right. David's expression hardened. But I'm doing it anyway. Because that little girl invested $1 in me, and I'm about to prove it was the best investment she'll ever make. The three men exchanged glances, a conversation conducted entirely in silence, years of partnership compressed into a moment. Finally, Frank opened his laptop. Okay, let's figure out how to dismantle an empire without starting a war. David Denaro had just ordered his own execution. The empire would fall, and from its ashes, a father would rise. The dismantling of an empire, David discovered, required the same ruthless precision as building one just in reverse, and with significantly more paperwork. Week 1 began with the shock waves. David sold his shipping interests to a consortium in Singapore for 60% of their actual value, a fire sale price that sent his competitors into paranoid spirals trying to understand what he knew that they didn't. He dissolved 3 shell corporations, transferred 2 warehouse operations to his Baltimore lieutenant, with a vague explanation about restructuring, and quietly sold his penthouse to a tech billionaire who thought he'd just scored the deal of the century. He had. David didn't care. The money, all of it, flowed through Frank's financial architecture like water through an elaborate filtration system, emerging clean on the other side. Offshore accounts became trust funds. Illicit profits became legitimate investments. Billions in dirty money transformed into a spotless inheritance for an 8-year-old girl who didn't know she'd just become one of the wealthiest children in America. You're selling the waterfront properties? Frank's voice carried disbelief during their third emergency meeting. David, those generate $40 million annually in passive income alone. Past tense, David corrected, signing another transfer document without reading it. They generated $40 million. Now they generate legal distance between me and my former life. Next. His associates reacted with predictable patterns: confusion, then anger, then fear. Mid-level operators started hedging their bets, reaching out to rival organizations, convinced David knew something catastrophic they didn't. His lawyers worked overtime fielding calls from panicked investors. His accountants developed stress-induced insomnia. David remained unmoved, methodically disassembling 30 years of careful construction with the same cold efficiency he'd used to build it. Week 2 brought the difficult conversations. David met personally with his top regional operators, men who'd served him loyally for decades and delivered variations of the same script, I'm stepping back. The organization is dissolving. You're getting your territories free and clear. Consider it retirement compensation." Most didn't believe him. Some thought it was a test. A few actually had the audacity to offer condolences, convinced he'd been diagnosed with something terminal. They weren't entirely wrong. "Boss, the Chicago operation wants confirmation this isn't some elaborate loyalty test," Leo reported during week 3. "They're convinced you're flushing out traitors. Tell them I'm retiring to focus on personal matters." Which is true. David signed another document, this one transferring a construction company to his former Pittsburgh lieutenant. "I'm personally invested in not getting arrested, killed, or investigated while raising a kid. They're going to think you've lost your mind." "I have." David's smile was sharp. "I've lost the part that thought power mattered more than keeping promises to dying women." By week 4, the rumors had evolved from confused to creative. David DeNaro was dying. David DeNaro was fleeing federal indictments. David DeNaro had found religion. David DeNaro had been replaced by a sophisticated clone. The truth that he was liquidating billions to become a full-time father never made anyone's list because it was too absurd to consider, which made it the perfect cover. Week 6 brought the moment David had been simultaneously dreading and anticipating. Marcus Chen, his lawyer, arrived at the office now mostly empty. Boxes stacked against walls, the view somehow less impressive without the weight of empire behind it carrying a folder with official seals. "Adoption papers," Marcus said simply, setting them on David's nearly bare desk. "Temporary custody granted last month. Full adoption finalized as of today. Congratulations, you're officially a father." David stared at the documents like they might explode. His name, his real name, not the dozens of aliases he'd accumulated next to Gina Brooks. Legal guardian, parent, father. There's more. Marcus produced a second folder, new identities. David Mitchell, software consultant, recently relocated from Seattle. Widower, adopted daughter after sister-in-law's death. Completely legitimate backstory, bulletproof documentation, tax returns, dating back 7 years. Mitchell. David tested the name. It felt foreign, safe, ordinary, perfect. And the location? Asheville, North Carolina. Small city, good schools, low crime, zero organized criminal presence. "I purchased a property under the Mitchell identity 6 weeks ago. 3-bedroom house, quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people bring casseroles to new neighbors." Marcus paused. "It's very suburban." "Sounds horrible," David said, signing the adoption papers with a steady hand. "We'll take it." Week 8 marked the final purge. David burned bridges with surgical precision, ensuring no threads remained that could pull him back. He had one last meeting with each of his top lieutenants, Frank, Ben, and the others who'd built the empire alongside him. "It's done," David announced, standing in his empty office for the last time. The penthouse echoed strangely, without furniture, without the trappings of power. "The DeNaro organization no longer exists. You're all released from service with full compensation packages and my recommendation that you find legitimate employment." "And if we don't want legitimate employment?" Frank asked, his accountant's precision cutting through sentiment. "Then you'll do it without me." David's voice carried finality. "I'm out. Completely. David DeNaro died in a boating accident off the coast of Greece last week. You'll see the reports hit tomorrow. Very tragic. Body never recovered. End of story." Boating accident. Ben's strategic mind appreciated the elegant simplicity. Classic. "I'm unimaginative under pressure." David pulled on his leather jacket. The casual uniform of David Mitchell, software consultant, bore no resemblance to the tailored suits David DeNaro had favored. "Leo, you ready?" Leo, who'd spent the last week transitioning from security chief to family friend helping with the relocation, nodded. "Truck's packed. Gina's packed. Your life is packed. We're ready." The men stood in uncomfortable silence, decades of partnership compressed into an awkward goodbye. "For what it's worth," Frank said finally, "I think you're insane, but I also think Charlotte Brooks chose the right person to trust." "High praise from a man who's seen me order worse things than retirement." David extended his hand. "Thank you. For everything." They shook hands, all of them a formal farewell to a life David was deliberately leaving behind. Then he walked out of his empty penthouse for the last time, took the elevator down to street level, where Leo waited with a moving truck, and climbed into the passenger seat beside Gina, who was clutching a stuffed elephant and staring at him with cautious hope. "We're really moving?" she asked quietly. "To the house with the big yard?" "We're really moving," David confirmed, buckling his seatbelt. "New city, new school, new start. Just you, me, and Leo. And I can call you." She hesitated, the word too big and scary to speak. "Dad." David's throat tightened. "You can call me Dad." Jaina's smile was worth every billion he'd just walked away from. The empire was dead. David Mitchell was born. And the most important contract of his life had just begun. The farewell happened on a Wednesday morning in the empty penthouse. With Manhattan stretching below like a kingdom, David was voluntarily abdicating. Frank and Ben had already said their goodbyes the previous week, their handshakes carrying the weight of decades compressed into seconds. But Leo was different. Leo was coming along for the first leg of the journey, helping with the transition, and perhaps more importantly, serving as the last living connection to who David had been. They stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows one final time, 3 men who'd built an empire that no longer existed. "The last transfers cleared this morning," Frank reported. "Ever the accountant even in farewell. Jenna's trust fund is fully funded, completely clean, and will generate approximately $6 million annually in passive income until she's 25, at which point she gains full access to the principal." He paused. "She's going to be very confused about why her software consultant dad can afford private colleges without blinking." "Then I'll explain compound interest very enthusiastically," David said. "Bore her into not asking follow-up questions." "The boating accident story is holding," Ben added, his strategic mind working until the very end. "Greek authorities confirmed the incident. Media coverage was appropriately minimal, and your competitors are already fighting over scraps of territory they think is suddenly available. By next month, David Denaro will be a footnote, a cautionary tale about hubris in the Mediterranean." "Perfect." David's voice carried no nostalgia, only satisfaction at a plan executed flawlessly. "And the outstanding issues?" "Resolved." Leo's tone was final. Every loose end tied, every potential problem neutralized non-fatally. He added quickly, catching David's look. "We're not leaving bodies behind. Just early retirements and sudden relocations." "Good." David turned from the window, the morning light catching his silver medallion one last time. "Then it's done." Frank extended a thick folder. "Emergency contacts, encrypted communication protocols, access codes for offshore accounts in case of catastrophic emergency, and a very good therapist's number in Asheville, because you're going to need it." "Therapist?" "You're a former crime lord, learning to parent an 8-year-old. Frank's expression was deadpan. "You're going to need professional help." David accepted the folder with something dangerously close to a smile. "Appreciated." "David." Leo stepped forward, his usual composure cracking slightly. "You sure about this? We can still—" "I'm sure." David's voice carried absolute certainty. "For the first time in 30 years, I'm completely sure about something." They stood in weighted silence, 3 men who'd shared violence and victory, now sharing something far more uncomfortable. Genuine emotion. "Take care of her," Frank said finally. "And yourself." "Take care of each other," David countered. "And for God's sake, find legitimate employment. I don't want to read about your arrests in the paper." "We're accountants and consultants now," Ben said dryly. "Very boring, very legal, aggressively tedious." "Perfect." The goodbyes were awkward, masculine, and sincere handshakes that lasted a second too long, shoulder clasps that carried 3 decades of partnership. Then Frank and Ben left, their footsteps echoing in the empty penthouse until the elevator doors closed with final authority. Leo remained, helping David collect the last boxes, pitifully few considering the life they represented. "She's waiting downstairs," Leo said quietly. "Asked me 3 times if you were really coming, or if this was some elaborate trick." David's chest tightened. "And what did you tell her?" "That you're the most stubborn man I've ever met. And when you make a promise, you keep it." Leo's expression softened. "Even if it costs you everything." They descended together, the elevator ride a meditation on endings and beginnings. When the doors opened to the ground floor, Jaina was there waiting on a bench in the lobby, her small suitcase beside her, her curly dark hair pulled back with a new clip Leo had bought her last week. She looked tiny in the cavernous marble space, a child-sized question mark in an adult world. David crossed to her with deliberate calm, kneeling so they were eye level. "Hey, sweetheart, ready for our adventure?" Jenna studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned young that adults lied. "You're really coming?" You're not going to change your mind and send me away? I'm really coming. David's voice was steady despite the emotion crushing his chest. You and me, Gina. That's the deal. That's the contract. I accepted your $1, and that means I'm all in. What about all your important business stuff? Leo said you were really important. I was. David glanced up at Leo, who was suddenly very interested in the ceiling. But I realized something. Being important doesn't matter if you're alone. And I made a promise to your mama that I'd take care of you. So I'm choosing you over all that important stuff. Gina's eyes filled with tears, the first she'd allowed herself since that terrible morning. My mama really trusted you? She did. And I'm going to spend every day proving she was right. David held out his hand. Come on. Let's go see our new house. It has a big backyard and a room with windows that Leo says is perfect for someone who likes to draw. I do like to draw. Gina took his hand tentatively, her small fingers wrapping around his tattooed ones. And you're going to stay? Like, actually stay? Not just visit sometimes? Actually stay. Every day. Every breakfast, every homework session, every parent-teacher conference. David stood, keeping her hand in his. I'm your dad now, Gina. Legally, officially, permanently. Which means you're stuck with me. Good. Her voice was small but fierce. Because I don't want anyone else. They walked toward the exit together, David in his simple black clothing and leather jacket, Gina in her purple hoodie, clutching her stuffed elephant, Leo following with boxes. At the door, David paused, looking back one final time at the lobby that represented everything he was leaving behind. Marble floors that had witnessed countless power plays, security desks that had logged 1,000 arrivals and departures, the elevator bank that led to an empty penthouse where empires had been built and destroyed. All of it meaningless compared to the small hand trusting his. You okay? Gina asked, noticing his hesitation. Yeah. David squeezed her hand gently. Just saying goodbye to someone I used to be. Was he nice? No, David said honestly, but he knew how to keep promises. And that's the part I'm keeping. They stepped through the doors into morning sunlight, leaving David Denaro's world behind forever. The moving truck waited at the curb, unremarkable, ordinary, perfect. Leo had already loaded their modest possessions, a life compressed into boxes that would fit in a suburban garage. North Carolina, here we come, Leo announced with forced cheerfulness. Land of barbecue, mountains, and absolutely no criminal empires. Sounds boring, Jana said, but she was smiling. It's going to be incredibly boring, David confirmed, lifting her into the truck's passenger seat, and we're going to love every minute of it. As Leo pulled into traffic, David resisted the urge to look back at the building, the city, the life he'd abandoned. Forward was the only direction that mattered now. Beside him, Jana fell asleep against his shoulder within 10 minutes, her trust absolute in a way that terrified and honored him simultaneously. David Denaro was dead. David Mitchell, father, guardian, keeper of promises, was just beginning. And the empire he'd build now would be measured in bedtime stories, school projects, and the fierce protection of one small girl's innocent future. The most important empire he'd ever create. 6 months later, David Mitchell stood in his Asheville kitchen, staring at what could generously be called scrambled eggs, and more accurately described as a crime against poultry. Dad? Jana's voice carried from the dining room, laced with the diplomatic concern of a child who'd learned her father's cooking skills topped out at cereal. Is something burning? No, David said, scraping blackened egg matter into the trash. This is just Cajun style, very authentic. We live in North Carolina now. Geography is irrelevant to breakfast. He started over, cracking eggs with the careful precision of someone who'd negotiated international treaties but couldn't manage a simple omelet. And technically, I'm improving. Last week I set off the smoke alarm twice. Today, 0 alarms. The day's still young, Leo called from the living room, where he was ostensibly reviewing security protocols but actually reading the newspaper and drinking coffee that didn't taste like a war crime. David Mitchell's life had become delightfully, absurdly ordinary. The 3-bedroom house on Maple Street was aggressively suburban white picket fence, actual neighbors who brought casseroles, a homeowners association that had opinions about lawn maintenance. His tattoos attracted occasional curious glances at school pickup, quickly dismissed when he showed up reliably at 3 p.m. every single day, rain or shine. He'd learned to cook, poorly, mastered the art of homework assistance, surprisingly well. Trigonometry was easier than money laundering, and discovered that parent-teacher conferences were significantly more stressful than negotiating with federal prosecutors. Mr. Mitchell, Gina's third-grade teacher, had said during last month's conference, Gina is exceptionally bright, but she's somewhat guarded. Takes time to trust people. Understandable, David had replied, his casual demeanor hiding the protective rage of someone who knew exactly why an 8-year-old would have trust issues. She's been through a lot. We're working on it. She speaks very highly of you. Says you're teaching her chess. Chess teaches strategic thinking, David had said automatically, then caught himself. And, patience. Very important life skill. Patience. The teacher had smiled, clearly charmed by this tattooed single father trying so earnestly. She had no idea she was talking to a man who'd once controlled half of New York's underground economy and was now genuinely stressed about whether his daughter's science fair volcano would actually erupt. It had erupted. Spectacularly. All over the gymnasium floor. David had never been prouder. Now, standing in his sunny kitchen with less burnt eggs, David heard Gina's footsteps approaching. She moved without crutches now, without even a limp doctor. Singh's surgery had been flawless, giving her a childhood of running and playing that should have been impossible. She burst into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and an oversized t-shirt, her curly dark hair escaping from a ponytail, her brown eyes bright with morning energy. Dad, I made you something. She held out a small gift wrapped in newspaper comics, her preferred wrapping paper, declaring store-bought stuff, wasteful. David wiped his hands on a dish towel, accepting the gift with the solemnity it deserved. Inside was a silver keychain, simple and inexpensive, with a single word engraved, Dad. The word hit him harder than any threat he'd ever received. For your keys, Jenna explained unnecessarily, suddenly shy. So you remember who you are now, not the important business guy. Just my dad. David knelt down, bringing them eye level, his throat impossibly tight. Jaina, I need you to understand something. Being your dad isn't just anything. It's the most important thing I've ever been. The best thing I've ever been. Better than being rich and powerful. So much better it's not even close. He attached the keychain to his keys, car keys, house keys, the mundane instruments of ordinary life. This is worth more than everything I left behind. You're worth more. Gina threw her arms around his neck with the unselfconscious affection of a child who'd finally learned she was safe. David held her, this small person who'd cost him billions and given him everything. Later, after breakfast, only slightly burnt. After Jana had run outside to play with the neighbor's dog, David stood in the living room holding the encased dollar bill. It had traveled with them from New York, packed carefully among the few possessions he'd kept. Now it deserved a proper home. On the mantel, he'd placed a photograph of Charlotte Brooks, the only picture Gina had of her mother, taken at a park on a good day. Charlotte's smile genuine despite the crutches visible at the frame's edge. David set the encased dollar beside it with reverent care. $1. The contract that had cost him everything and saved him from himself. Through the window, he watched Gina playing in the backyard, running freely, laughing with the unconscious joy of childhood, her curly hair bouncing as she chased the neighbor's golden retriever. She was healthy, safe, happy. Everything Charlotte had wanted for her. Everything that dollar had purchased. Leo appeared at David's shoulder, holding 2 cups of actually decent coffee. Regrets? None. David accepted the cup, his eyes never leaving Gina. I spent 30 years building an empire that would have collapsed eventually anyway. Prison, betrayal, or death, those were the only possible endings to that story. And this ending? This ending? David smiled, genuine and free. Parent-teacher conferences, burnt breakfasts, and teaching a kid that some things matter more than power. He touched the keychain in his pocket. This ending is perfect. Gina spotted him through the window and waved enthusiastically, her whole face lighting up with uncomplicated love. David waved back. This man whose hands had signed death warrants and now struggled to braid hair for school picture day. He looked at Charlotte's photograph, at the encased dollar bill, at the life he'd built from the ashes of his empire. You paid the right price, after all, he whispered. The dollar had bought him redemption. Jaina had given him purpose. Charlotte's trust had given him transformation. And David Mitchell, former crime lord, current father, permanent keeper of promises, had finally found the role he was meant to play. Not emperor. Not boss. Just dad. And it was enough. It was everything. The end. What should happen in part 2? Drop your predictions in the comments, subscribe, like, share, and turn on that notification button to be alert when it drops. Thank you.